Okay, so on Friday, I had you guys put in questions that you may have had about our information about this unit. Um, I will go over this information in class today, which is Monday, May 13th. But I also wanted to make a video. That way, if you want to refer back to this as you are studying on your own at home, you can. So, the first thing that a lot of people wanted me to talk about was the different principles of natural selection. So, there are four different principles of natural selection. We have variation, adaptation, overproduction of offspring, and descent with modification. A lot of people asked for differentiation, or what is the difference between variation and adaptation. So, variation is any difference in the traits within a population. Um, and then adaptation is the variation that allows the organism to survive longer. So, a beneficial variation. So, if I ask you for variation on a test, you're going to have a list or at least two different types of traits, two different versions of a trait. In adaptation, you will just tell me one trait that is the most beneficial. So, down here, you can see these birds, they have different beaks, different feather colors, right? So those are our variations. One of those would be the adaptation that would help them survive the best. Over here we have our adaptation, right? So these are our peppered moths. As the Industrial Revolution happened, the dark moths survived more because the trees were also dark. So our adaptation would be the dark coloration. Overproduction of offspring, organisms are going to produce a larger number of offspring than what can actually survive. So, this is based on space, based on other limited resources, and this creates a form of competition that happens um, between those individuals. And that just, again, allows for adaptations. So, a differentiation between beneficial and non beneficial traits. Then, descent with modification. Organisms that have a beneficial trait or an adaptation are going to survive and produce offspring and pass on the beneficial trait. So as generations go on, you will see more of this trait. So if we go back to the peppered moths, as generations go on, we are going to see more moths with the dark trait. Then we have the different mechanisms of microevolution. So the first one is gene flow. Gene flow is just movement from one population to another. So this is migration. It's going to increase the genetic variation in the population. So you can see here in the picture, we have a population of all black beetles, a population of all white beetles. One black beetle is going to move over the hill and to this other population that is going to cause a change in the genetic variation and increase, and that affects the traits that are in that population. Then we have natural selection. Natural selection is organisms that are more fit to survive in their environment, will survive and reproduce. Remember, fitness is not how many bench presses you can do, how much weight you can curl. It is how well you can survive and reproduce in your environment. So beneficial traits or adaptations will become more common over time. So you can see here, they are naturally being selected against the white beetles because they live in a dark environment. And as time goes on, you are going to see more of the trait that is being selected for naturally. Sexual selection, then, or non random mating, is the selection of traits that are preferred, but not necessarily good for fitness, right? So, females are going to choose who they want to reproduce with, but those traits aren't necessarily going to help survive, right? So, if we think of peacocks, they have these nice, big, beautiful tail feathers. Um, that helps them be selected to mate and reproduce, but it hinders them. It makes it harder for them to get away from predators and run from or hide from predators, right? Same if we're looking at ducks. So the male ducks have these nice, bright, pretty colors, but that's because the females choose for it, not because it's going to help them survive. So this does not increase the survival, but it will increase the reproductive rate. Mutations are any change in DNA that cause a new genotype. So simple, we have a random mutation in one of our sperm or eggs, and then there's a new genotype with a new phenotype that gives us our black beetles. Genetic drift sounds like gene flow, but it is different. So gene flow is the movement of organisms. Genetic drift is random. It is a random change in the frequency of alleles or the traits. It is not selected against any specific trait. It just whoever happens to be there is killed, right? Is dead. So if you're stepping on an anthill, whatever ants happen to be there, they die off. If a forest fire happens, an earthquake, a volcano, anything like that, it's a random and it causes a loss in genetic variation. But it is a random loss of genetic variation. So that is all of our mechanisms for evolution. Then we have one of our types of evidences for evolution that you guys wanted me to go through, which was our different forms of morphology. So we have 3 different structures that we talked about. We have vestigial, analogous, and homologous. Here we have our vestigial structures. This is a structure that once served a purpose in our evolutionary ancestors, but no longer has a purpose. And this is evidence for divergent evolution, right? So we have examples here of our wisdom teeth and our appendix, right? So wisdom teeth used to help with grinding tougher foods when our evolutionary ancestors ate more plants and stuff like that. But now we don't really need them to grind down food because of the advancements we've made. Appendix, right? It used to help with digestion, immune system, stuff like that. Now we don't really need it. And actually can cause issues, so people get it removed very often. Homologous structures, these are structures that have similar structure or construction, but not the same function. So this is evidence of divergent evolution. So we looked at the 4 limbs of all of these animals, right? So we looked at how they have a humerus, a radius and ulna, metacarpals, carpals, and phalanges, and they all have that in the exact same order. So they have the same construction, the same structure to them, but they each do a different function, right? Humans help grab, cheetahs run, whales swim, bats fly. So those are homologous. Then analogous structures are structures that have same functions, but different structures or different construction. So this is convergent evolution. So we have a fin of a shark, a fin of a penguin, and a fin of a dolphin, right? They are all structured differently, but they are all fins. They all help swim, right? So they have the same structure, but same function, but different structure. And people also wanted me to go over this last page, which was on our packet from Friday. So if we start in the middle here for evolution, I'm going to go up. So the 5 different mechanisms of evolution, all the ones that are colored in are the ones that you guys had to fill in. So starting here, I knew that this had to be natural selection because it says the 4 principles are. The only one of our mechanisms of evolution that has 4 principles is natural selection. And then we have overproduction of offspring and descent with modification. We need to figure out where variation and where adaptation goes. We can figure out that variation goes here because we know that there's an ultimate source of variation and that variation can increase. Adaptations can't really increase. Adaptations change over time, but we don't say they increase. So adaptation is going to go over here. Variation is going here, right? So then we know mutations is the ultimate source of variation. Gene flow can increase variation, and like we said before, sexual selection can decrease survival rate. Then we have our evidences of evolution. Biogeography studies where living things are located. Paleontology studies fossils. We have embryology, which is the study of embryos. Morphology has 3 different structures that are studied. So you have vestigial structures, an example which is human tailbones, homologous structures, limbs on dogs and whales, analogous structures, wings on butterflies and birds. And then lastly, we have biochemistry, which studies DNA and proteins. So those are all the questions that you guys had for me. If you have any more questions, you can ask me before the test. Good luck studying.